Hi all, thanks for coming back to our YouTube channel. I hope you enjoy what we've been posting out. There's obviously going to be a lot of material as we go along, but today I want to talk about German fighter pilots and specifically their tactics, how that evolved, and the Messerschmitt 109 Emil, the E versions in the Battle of Britain. So it's a fantastic aeroplane, and the one thing that I love about these German aircraft, German fighters historically, they've always been so colourful. Whereas we've just got the drab green and brown camouflage pattern on our Spitfires and Hurricanes and so on and so forth. And all of these yellow nose what's it look wonderful, don't they? And it's actually important to know that this isn't just a pose, this yellow nose, and neither did it indicate an elite outfit, which is what a lot of the British pilots believed. Not at all. It's a colour coding aircraft identification system in the air. Some were yellow, some were white, some were a mixture, other colours, red stripes, all sorts of things. And it denotes the different Gruppe and the different Staffel. So the way that a Jägerschwadron, a German fighter group, is composed, firstly it's composed of the Staffel, which is essentially a squadron, and then a wing, a Gruppe, that's 3 squadrons, 3 Staffel, so 1 to 3 is 1 Gruppe, 4 to 6 2 Gruppe, and so on, and there's 3 Gruppen in the Jägerschwadron. So it's just interesting to ponder that, but they're superbly colourful, aren't they? And I think they're great to make models of as well, actually. So there we are, the 109. Now, the great thing about this as an aeroplane is Willy Messerschmitt designed it, and it first flew at Augsburg in September 1935. Now, you'll often hear people talk about the Spitfire, about it being all metal, and it was the first all metal aircraft. It wasn't. In fact, it was certainly the first British all metal monoplane fighter, but the 109 was first. It harnessed advanced techniques in all kinds of respects, and it was the world's first all metal construction monoplane. Now the Hurricane, of course, which was our first prototype fighter to fly in November 1935, that had partially fabric covered fuselage, and the first wings were also had a bit of fabric on them, I think, and so it wasn't quite as advanced a design as the 109. That's the important thing to understand. So the 109, they took it to Spain, the early ones, and people like Werner Melders and Adolf Galland, who became 2 of the great German aces, and I believe Melders was the greatest fighter pilot who ever lived, quite honestly, who was killed in a flying accident in Russia, returning from Udet's funeral when he was General of Jagdflieger, the day fighter general. But Melders was exceptional, called the father of modern air fighting, Vati Melders, during the Battle of Britain, Commodore of Jägerschwadron 51, and in Spain he worked it all out. So what Melders realised was that tight bunched formations in fighter combat just don't work. And over here, the Air Ministry even considered that fighter-to-fighter combat would be impossible because of the high speeds that these new fighters reached, and therefore the forces exerted on the human body would make such contests impossible. So all of the RAF tactics were about intercepting unescorted German bombers, and that was the other important thing, that it was perceived, quite understandably, that any attack from Germany would come across the North Sea and across Britain's east coast, across East Anglia. And when you think about it, the way Fighter Command was organised for the Battle of Britain, that made 12 Group protecting Midlands and the industrial north, not 11 Group protecting London and the southeast, actually the front line. And the RAF thinking was that flying in Vic, so that's 3 aircraft tightly bunched together, they could come down, attack German bombers that are going to fly quite cooperatively, ponderously and slowly without taking evasive action. And instead of just bringing the 8 machine guns of a single aircraft to bear, they would bring 24. They would bring the batteries of 3 aircraft. And then each section in turn would break away and be replaced by the next one. Now, that's all very well, but of course in the event, those bombers were escorted because of Hitler's lightning fast advance to the Channel coast, which put even London within range of this lethal fighter. And in Spain, melders have realised that the way forward was not these bunch formations, but spread out in line abreast. Each aircraft stepped up, protecting its neighbour, and the pilots at least 200 metres apart. Now, it's also 2 fighting pairs called a rotor. And in combat, the idea is that the swarm of 4 breaks into 2 fighting pairs of leader and wingman. And the leader's job is to get the shot, and the wingman's job is to protect the leader's tail. So the leader doesn't have to worry about who's coming up behind. He can just concentrate on getting the shot. So that's absolutely brilliant. It sounds obvious, but it's brilliant because this is unprecedented. And as an old colleague of mine used to say about a job we were doing once, there's no footprints ahead in the snow. So it took a bit of working out. And the great thing for melders is that this actually remains the basis of fighter combat today. I was given a presentation in Tewkesbury in Gloucestershire about the Battle of Britain. Very well attended it was too, well over 100 people there, which was good. And afterwards I spoke to a chap who approached me, and I've forgotten his name, but he was a Tornado F3 pilot, the high altitude fighter version of the Tornado, the Tonka. He said what you were saying about the German fighter formations and tactics was spot on, and it's exactly what we did in the Gulf, except our aircraft were 2 miles apart, not 200 metres. And of course that's got to be because of the increase in speed, hasn't it? Everything happens so quickly. So that was really advanced stuff. So the Germans were then able to take the 109 to Poland, and then the attack on the west. Now, in popular culture and popular belief, we think about the Blitzkrieg across the Low Countries and France as being won entirely because of the superiority of the German tanks and army and the Blitzkrieg tactics. Well, that's only partially true. At the end of the day, the German army was still horse-drawn, in fact, and it was throughout the war, actually. So what really won the Battle of France was this. There is no question about it. Read academic papers, read academic works about air power, proper air power studies, not enthusiast publications with lots of flaky graphics. You know, get in there into the air power study centres like at Birmingham University and etc. You know, and really study the actual real proper research. And people like John Terraine, who was an early official historian of the Royal Air Force, you know, he said quite rightly that the Battle of France was won because of the complete fighter superiority of the Me109. And what that meant was that aerial umbrella enabled the tanks, the German army, the panzers to go about their business without fear of air attack. Now, again, if you think about this, this is exactly what happened later in Sicily and Italy, and then especially in Normandy, by which time the Allied air forces had got aerial superiority over the battlefield. You think about Normandy, the 2nd Tactical Air Force, low-level fighter bombers supporting the army, close air cooperation, which the Germans had worked out in Spain, you know, it took the Allies, took the British until going out to the desert Air Force to work out close air support over there. People like Billy Burton, 1936 Cranwell Sword of Honour winner, exceptional individual. They were over there with Harry Broadhurst and Air Vice Marshal Conyngham, working it all out, working something out that the Germans had worked out 5 or 6 years before. But that's it. That is the importance of fighter cover, which flies in the face of the pre-war thinking anyway, that it was all going to be bomber-centric, that the bomber will always get through. The British Prime Minister, Stanley Baldwin, told the House of Commons famously before the war that there was no power on earth that could save you from the bomber. The bomber would always get through. And in fact, Lord Trenchard, the father of the Royal Air Force, Boom Trenchard, famously said, or infamously said really, that there was nothing could save you. Fighters were only of any value to keep up the morale of one's own people. Well, that all proved to be quite wrong, didn't it? And thank goodness for people like Lord Dowding, Air Chief Marshal Sir Hugh Dowding, as he was at the time, and his senior Air Staff Officer, Air Vice Marshal Sir Keith Park, New Zealander, who helped, they didn't create, but they helped develop and perfect what was the best, most advanced aerial defence system in the world at the time, from Fighter Command's inception in 1936 to when the Battle of Britain was fought in 1940. So the Germans didn't have it all their own way in the Battle of Britain. One of the reasons for that was because of radar. So radar was able to provide Fighter Command with early indication of Luftwaffe assemblies over France, over the Pas de Calais, over Cherbourg, and their advances across the Channel. Now, the only problem with that is that radar at the time was only outwardly looking. So once the German aircraft had crossed in over the coast, the only way you could track it was via another airplane in the sky or the observer corps. So it was all visual. That's fine, but what happens when you've got 10/10 cloud or even thick scattered cloud and the aircraft are flying above? Another issue is that RDF could not then identify individual aircraft types. So all it could tell you is there was 50 plus building up over Calais, and when they moved out towards England, but it couldn't tell you what that formation consisted of. And that's important, and we're going to come on to that. So we've got to France, we've got aerial supremacy achieved by the Luftwaffe and the Me109 over there, which led to that unprecedented victory. And let's just have a look about what's happening. I mean, over there and in Poland and France and so on, the Germans had fought obsolete aircraft types. Even the Hurricane, it was not, its advantage over the 109 is both the Spitfire and Hurricane could outturn it. And in fighter combat, that's crucial because the standard evasive tactic really is to go into a right or left tight turn, to outturn your opponent so that you can fire ahead of it when he flies into your bullets, deflection shooting. It's all about turning, you see. So if you can outturn your opponent, that's a huge advantage. Well, the Hurricane certainly had that advantage. And on paper, the Hurricane had a maximum ceiling, the Mark I Hurricane, of 34,200 feet, but really it performed best between, say, 15,000 and 23,000 max. The Spitfire Mark I, 34,000 feet, and faster, you see. The Spitfire's speed 355 miles an hour, the Hurricane 324. So the Hurricane's just that much slower. But it's all about height and performance at high altitude. And the 109, the Me109E was constant, although there were different variants, the 1, the 2, the 3, the 4, which had slight variations in performance and armament and things like that. Essentially, it was the same aircraft. Whereas in July 1940, the new Spitfires, the improved Spitfire, the Mark II-A, started to reach the squadrons, and that gave a much better performance. It had an automatic start, and a high, you know, it could fly 38,000 feet probably, much higher. And in fact, in October, the Mark II Hurricanes, the first ones, reached 421 flight at Gravesend, which was a Jim Crow spotting flight. Now, what they did, they were going up to monitor the German formations in the air and visually report back what the composition was, because they were coming in so high at that time. And the reason they came in so high was because of the 109's performance. Now, by 30th of September 1940, the German daylight bombers had been defeated. So we're now into a totally different ball game in October. The plan is that we've got either lone Junkers 88, which is the best bomber they had, fast, reasonably heavily armed, excellent airplane, or either in small formations of up to Grupper strength max. The raid on Westland aircraft, 7th of October 1940, that was 2 Grupper KG-51. But those lone Junkers 88s cause real problems, and that's something for another video, because that is really fascinating. Popping out of cloud, you know, navigating all the way from France in bad weather, hopping in and out of cloud, and then attacking various targets, mainly connected with the aircraft industry, up until we get into sort of mid-October. But Reich Marshal Hermann Goering, chief of the Luftwaffe, decides that what's going to happen is one Staffel in each Jagdgeschwader Gruppe is going to become a Jagdbomber, known as a Jabo. So that's a fighter bomber. So that's ringing up the 109 to carry a single 500-pound bomb under its belly. And this is kind of controversial, because the fighter pilots, particularly Adolf Galland, Commodore of JG-51, who later succeeded his friend Melders as General de Jagdflieger, they deeply resented this, because there'd already been problems in the Battle of Britain where Goering had insisted that the fighters remained very closely connected to the bomber formations on these escort flights. Now, you know, big issue, because this, like the Spitfire and Hurricane, when all said and done, is designed as a short-range interceptor. It wasn't designed as a long-range offensive fighter or escort fighter, such as the P-51 Mustang, the P-38 Lightning, the P-47 Thunderbolt. So it's being asked to do a job it wasn't designed for, just as the Spitfire had to do the following year, and until eventually the American long-range fighters turn up, which have that specific performance for that role. So yeah, range is a problem, and numbers are a problem. And by this time, they're frustrated. These guys, they're crisscrossing across the bomber formation, so that they are flying as slow or covering ground as slow as the ponderous bombers, and this burns up fuel. So we end up in a situation where the 109, which has range of 416 miles, my notes say, it's not enough, and a lot of them barely made the French coast on the way back, and a lot ended up in the Channel, actually running out of petrol, and they only had 20 minutes combat time over London. So the 109 pilots are constantly watching that fuel gauge, and that's a distraction, definitely a distraction. What's in their favour is that the Germans, surprisingly, seen as Germany is virtually a landlocked country. I mean, I know that we've got Wilhelmshaven and Bremen, Hamburg and all of that, but I mean, they're not really a seafaring nation, are they, Germany? Not really. Not like Britain being an island, a sceptred isle, surrounded by water. Now, you'd think then that the Royal Air Force would have had an efficient air-sea rescue service in place. Well, it didn't. RAF pilots relied on passing trawlers and other shipping, at a fluke, and maybe a boat putting out from port that's seen them come down to be rescued. But the Germans had the Seenotdienst, which was their air-sea rescue service, equipped with Heinkel float planes, that fished pilots out of the water. And they also had what were called lobster pots dotted around the channel that contained items that a downed pilot would need: dry, warm clothing, food, water, etc. And then the CNOTDs would pick people up from those little floating stations. So they had it all sorted out. It was brilliant, really. Churchill, however, decided that those Heinkel float planes were legitimate targets and accused them of reconnaissance work, which they weren't. The Germans had enough reconnaissance aircraft as it was. So that that was all a bit controversial, making them a legitimate target, and there were a lot shot down. But anyway, but the advantage that the 109's got is height. It's an excellent fighter at height, and it's all about height and surprise. I remember Kajek Budzik, who was a Polish Spitfire pilot, said to me that he always got too excited because, you know, the adrenaline's going through you, and he said, "Oh, I just found it so hard to sneak up behind a German fighter because I was just so keyed up, so excited about it." It's all about surprise. It's all about the ambush. And this is where this excelled, because the 109 up there, able to operate at say 35,000 feet. Now, next time you go on holiday, you're in an airliner and you're probably at about between 37,000 39,000 feet. You imagine flying nearly that high in a 109 or a Spitfire with an unpressurized cockpit. That's serious flying, you know. And in October, Goering has made these one staff in every grupper, Yabo. The German pilots resent that, people like Gallen, because they think we haven't got enough fighters to do what they're asking us to do anyway, and now they're taking away, you know, virtually a whole grupper of a Geschwader, 1 in 3, 1 squadron in every grupper being a Yabo unit. But the idea of this was they were going to come in very high with the fighter bombers, escorted by, you know, 150 Me109s. And by coming in so high, they've got the advantage of height and surprise and sun. So they're way up there. Now, these combats are often fought above 10 tenths cloud at that time of year. So RAF squadrons climbing can be seen below, stand out like a sore thumb. Earlier in the Battle of Britain, Gar Schall famously dropped on 501 Squadron over Canterbury on the 18th of August 1940, shot down 4 Hurricanes in 2 minutes, and the rest of the squadron flew on oblivious. Didn't even know it had happened. So, yeah, the advantage of height and surprise are absolutely crucial. And the Germans certainly had that. And the other thing they had, well, the Spitfire was able to get up there, and that's another problem in October, because the Spitfire squadrons are being used in wings. It wasn't all about the 12 group wing at Duxford. Don't get me started on that, and that's going to be a series of videos, because Keith Park used wings from September onwards in 11 group. 2 Hurricane squadrons, or 2 Spitfire squadrons, or even 3 Spitfire squadrons together in October from Hornchurch and Biggin Hill. Those squadrons were up there, but they were having to provide standing patrols. Now, I remember Geoffrey Wellham, who became possibly one of the most famous Battle of Britain pilots in recent years because of his excellent memoir, First Light. I remember Jeff saying to me long before that book came out, you know, that was the most exhausting time, because we were going up at those high altitudes 3, 4, 5 times a day, because they're having to provide standing patrols. Because once the Germans have taken off and they're on their way, these formations of fighters and fighter bombers, they're moving very fast. It's not like a big raid building up with Heinkel's or Dorniers, and they've all got to assemble over Calais or Cherbourg, and then all the 109s are going to come, and all the timing is critical. If the bombers are late, the fighters are there wasting fuel, you know, this is big stress. And then they strike out, and it takes time for those bombers. Not long, granted, but it does take time for them to cross the channel and then fly up to London. That was the great thing when they went to London, because It wasn't even quite so much then about relieving the pressure on the airfields. It was actually about the fact that by going to London, they were extending the time over England and therefore increasing the opportunities for interception. That's the real nub of it. But the 109 has also got certain technical advantage over the Spitfire. It's got a fuel injected down the bend engine. Very important, because what that means is the Spitfire's Rolls-Royce Merlin engine and the Hurricane has got a float carburettor, so it's gravity effective. So in the dive, apart from Spitfire pilots who are able to perfect this special kind of bunt that produced invert sort of negative G really to overcome that, the Merlin would always cut out. So the 109 was very, very fast in the dive. And we think about popular culture, about all this dogfighting stuff. Well, yes, there were dogfights, but essentially it's about this ambush. It's about being up there, seeing the enemy, and these pilots flying the swarm, the line abreast. They're strung out. They're not having to concentrate on formation flying. They're searching for the enemy. Unlike our guys who are flying almost wingtip to wingtip, more concerned about colliding with Red 2 than what the Germans are doing. So this is clever stuff. Now, Wing Commander David Cox DFC, who was a sergeant pilot in 19 Squadron during the Battle of Britain, I remember going to David's house near Reading many years ago, and on the wall he had a Robert Taylor painting of JG-26 taking off, Adolf Gallen's lot. And I said, oh, that's unusual, you know, in a Spitfire pilot's house. And he said, well, why not? He said they were brilliant. They were brilliant. The 109 was an absolutely fantastic airplane. You know, he said the dirty darts, he used to call it, the dirty dart, where suddenly the 109s would just come zooming down at incredibly high speed, and it would be bang, 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 and away, gone. None of this First World War dogfighting over the trenches business and pilots shooting at each other with revolvers. Straight down, bang, 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 with these two 20mm Oerlikon cannons, two 7.92mm machine guns, nose mounted, bang, 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 away, gone. And then Red 2 shot down, Blue 2, whatever. So quite amazing. And so this is playing to the strengths of the aircraft. The high altitude, the sun, being able to climb over the Pas-de-Calais, climb over the Channel, and be in place as you approach the English coast. Perfect. Perfect. Now, they were met. I mean, it's interesting. I've just finished volume 7 of this 8-volume unprecedented narrative of the Battle of Britain, and it is unprecedented. I was very concerned when we started that project when people bandied the word definitive around, but actually it is. I defy anybody in the future to ever do anything like this again, because it's 360. It's looked at absolutely everything, and not just, it's everything. It's the politics, the diplomacy, the strategy, the people, the home front experience, all of the fighting, every single combat report, every single squadron diary, absolutely everything. So studying a whole 16 weeks, day by day, minute by minute, in that detail, it's been astonishing what's come out of it. And volume 7 concerns October 1940. And you can see how the combats, they increase in height as the battle goes on. So they start at sort of 15,000, 20,000 feet, while there's all this bomber escort stuff going on. But by the time we get into mid-October or before, the 109s are at 31,000 feet. Now, RAF squadron commanders cottoned on pretty quickly that if the controller says bandits incoming at 20,000 feet, they try and climb higher to 23,000, say, to always have that height advantage. Well, of course, the Germans cotton on to this, so they're coming in higher and higher and higher and higher until we get up to 30,000 feet. So the Spitfires, especially when we've got the Mark II, they're going up to 30,000 feet on their standing patrols, ready to meet the 109s on the same level. So the 109s go up to 31,000 feet. That's astonishing in an aircraft like that. Absolutely amazing. So it was this constant battle of height and surprise, and the 109's diving down. I mean, another thing about the 109 is this diving away. Time and time again, you read combat reports where RAF pilots have been credited with a 109 destroyed. They haven't seen it crash. There's no 109 down on the ground, but they're credited destroyed. And all they've seen is hit a 109 and it's dived away, streaming black smoke. Well, that's because that's its standard evasive tactic, is the high speed dive. And by ramming the throttle forward, that's going to produce a plume of black smoke from the exhaust port. So the aircraft's not shot down at all. Probably disappear into cloud and level out. White smoke is a different matter. Squadron leader Peter Brown AFC, who flew Spitfires with 41 Squadron in the Battle of Britain, Peter and I looked at this in great detail 30 odd years ago. And I remember Peter saying, you know, he said, if you saw white smoke, that was different because that was glycol. And if you've got no coolant, your engine's going to overheat, you're only going one place, and that's down. He said, black smoke's a different thing. Could be exhaust fumes, and very often was. So that's interesting. So this high-speed diving manoeuvre, you know, is just so important. The dirty dart that David called it. Absolutely brilliant. And these German fighter pilots were professional. Now, the Royal Air Force that fought the Battle of Britain, let's not forget, we got this small nucleus of professional airmen. The Royal Air Force between the wars was like a posh flying club where everybody knew each other, and it was what Fred Roberts, who was an armourer on 19 Squadron, called the strawberries and cream and fruitcake for tea period of the Royal Air Force's history, and I think that's right. 1936, the expansion plan. It's obvious war is very likely with Germany, and so at last rearmament begins and the expansion of the Royal Air Force. So we have the Royal Air Force Volunteer Reserve, in which those people are remaining in their civilian occupations, studying in the evening, learning to fly at the weekends, and they're available as a trained reserve to be mobilised and called up for the duration of the emergency in the event of war, which is obviously what happened. We've also got the Auxiliary Air Force, which is based on the territorial principle. So, for example, I live in Gloucester in England, and we had 501 County of Gloucester Squadron based at Filton, which is where the Concorde was designed, built and flew from, just down the road at Bristol, County of Gloucester. So they were sort of locally raised. But at the end of the day, the Volunteer Reserve and the auxiliaries who flew at the weekend, they were amateurs, not professional airmen. Whereas the Luftwaffe, they were all professional airmen. There was no reserve, there was no part-time airmen, no amateurs, they were professionals. And the other important thing is that if you were a German fighter pilot, that's exactly what you were until such time as you were shot down, killed, or incapacitated through wounds. So that's one reason why the German pilot scores were so much bigger than ours, because our pilots were rested. The other reason is, especially early in the war and in Russia, they were fighting obsolete types, so they were fairly straightforward to shoot down, and there were lots of them. Whereas with the German Air Force shrinking as the losses increased over the years, Allied pilots had less targets to shoot at when you think about it. So there's lots of reasons behind all that, and that's for another day. But, you know, I can't... I really admire these guys. I mean, it's nothing about politics. This is about air fighting at the end of the day. They were professional. They had an excellent airplane. Even Goering's idea of the Yarbos, the fighter bombers, I mean, that's one problem. This machine is not designed for dive bombing. Neither was the Spitfire, of course, but it did a lot of that. But the pilots were untrained as well as fighter bomber pilots. There were lines on the cockpit canopy, so you knew that if the horizon was at 30 degrees, that's the angle of dive sort of thing, but it was as primitive as that. So having to come in high, there were low-level attacks. I mean, North Weald was was hit hard on the 29th of October. And Hurricanes were taken off actually just as the fighter bombers turned up and dive bombed North Wheel from about 2,000 feet. But generally speaking, these guys, they're coming in over London, and they're mainly routed up towards London, turning over Maidstone or coming in over Rochester Way, and they are just randomly dropping bombs. With this machine, there's no bomb sight. It's not like the American Norden bomb sight from the strategic bombing campaign later on. I mean, this is sort of belt and braces, really. So these bombs are being dropped randomly, indiscriminately. You cannot specifically drop a 500-pound bomb from 30,000 feet over London with any accuracy whatsoever. So it was pot luck what it hit. And there was, there were no damage to no military targets. I mean, certainly railways. The railway network was badly knocked about in places and at times. But generally speaking, it's civilian properties that are suffering as a result of these raids. But the theory behind it is that because radar can't identify whether there's fighter bombers in that formation, all they know is there's a big German formation coming in, and at that height it would suggest that they're Me109s. I mean, Heinkel's are not going to fly that high, are they? So if you've got something coming in at Angels 25 plus, they're 109, and that fitted with the tactics and strategy of that phase of the battle. So the RAF controller is pretty much able to second guess what they are. Plus you've got 421 flight up there, the Jim Crows, reporting on what's happening. But because they've got bombs, and because that's causing damage and loss of civilian life, these incursions cannot be ignored. Now, prior to these big German fighter sweeps of over 100 109s, sweeping over Kent, sweeping over Sussex, sweeping over the Essex coast, the Thames estuary, they're only going to be dangerous if you put another fighter up to engage them. So by putting fighter bombers in the formation and dropping those bombs like that, that means fighter command is having to respond to every single such incursion. And that's why, going back to what Geoffrey Wellham said, it was really exhausting time. Flying at 30,000 feet 4 or 5 times a day on those standing patrols, never mind the patrols that you actually engage the enemy on. So very, very exhausting time. And I do find it fascinating. It's interesting actually that when I'm writing, very often I've actually got the real thing about. I mean, this is the wreckage of a fighter bomber, an Me109 E1 that was shot down over Hampshire, over Lymington, by a Polish pilot, Tadek Niewieski, 609 Squadron, based at Warmwell. What we discovered, because these fragments here are probably the biggest pieces that were found, and we did find a lot of it, but it was fragmentary. The fighter bomber. The pilot bailed out, Pollock, who was captured, 19 years old, JG2, and the aircraft exploded. So, you can actually put your hands there. There's exploded ammunition, there's a bit of perspex from the canopy, bits of engine, bits of airframe, and that is, remnants of a Me109E Yabo, which is amazing. Another thing that's dear to my heart is we've probably seen the famous photo of Gar Schall, and I think Schall is one of the sort of lesser known German aces actually. Now I've researched recently a leading German ace whose kills just do not stand scrutiny, and there's a podcast about that, about Helmut Vick and the kills for his oak leaves to his Knight's Cross. They just cannot be substantiated. There's no truth to it whatsoever. But not so with Gar Schall. Excellent fighter pilot, succeeded Galland as Gruppenkommandier of 3 Gruppe JG26 and ultimately became Commodore of JG26. And this photo, taken at Caffier, near Calais, in the Pas de Calais, the Germans were doing pretty much what 2nd Tactical Air Force did in Normandy, using temporary airstrips in these big French cornfields. And that was taken at Cafier during the Battle of Britain. He was very, very helpful to me. Survived the war. He used to ring me on Christmas Day. "Oh, Dilip, it is Gerd here from Munich to wish you happy Christmas." And what a lovely bloke, you know. So it's nothing about politics, is it? It's just about, you know, the ability and the story of air fighting. And these guys were good, you know. I think somebody said in Band of Brothers at the end, talking about some of his comrades, you know, and furthermore, these guys were good. Well, furthermore, these guys were good. So there's good. And think about what information is available in English. First-hand accounts from the other side. A long time, Gallen's book, The First and the Last, has been available, which is well worth reading. Well, very well worth reading, actually. Heinz Knocker did I Flew for the Führer. That's another good one. But I think one of the absolute best is Ulrich Steinhilper, 3 JG52, and Spitfire on My Tail, which is his account of the Luftwaffe before the war, the early war period, flying during the Battle of Britain, and ultimately being shot down and captured over Kent. And the wreckage of his 109 can be seen today in the Kent Battle of Britain Museum at Hawkinge. It's an absolutely brilliant book. And I knew Ulrich Steinhilper, and I love this because I know you might be able to see that, but he signed it for me and drew a little photo of his parachute descent, which was fun. That was at Biggin Hill, actually. We were doing a book signing, 7th of June 1998. To Dilip, good luck, Ulrich Steinhilper, X3 Staffel, JG52, Me109 E4, Battle of Britain, 27th of the 10th 1940, then prisoner of war in Canada. Biggin Hill, 7th of June 1998. And that's the man who actually went on to invent word processing. So isn't it a good job he wasn't killed? There we go. So I hope that you found that interesting. There's always lots of things to talk about when you investigate something in real detail. You come up with all sorts of things. I mean, a lot of the narrative of the Battle of Britain was created immediately afterwards in the late 40s, or even during the war, really, with the Air Ministry pamphlets, and then later, and going on into the 1960s, where there was a certain way of looking at things. And a lot of the information that was available then, particularly from the German side, wasn't, it was just wasn't there. So today, you know, as researchers, we have access to far more information, both here and in Germany. So this is why doing things like this is so important, because what you're talking about is an evolving process. Historical research is an evolving process. Now, for example, when Frank Mason, did his Battle over Britain, which probably came out around about the time as Wood and Dempster's The Narrow Margin, so about 1969-ish, about the time of the Battle of Britain film, it was the best material available, based on the records and information available at the time. All these years later, that's changed. A lot of what's in those books isn't right. And it may well be one day that things that are written today will be slightly revised. Not very much, I don't think. But one or two things might be slightly revised because there'll be more information available. So it's an evolving thing. It's called historiography. And that's a fascinating subject all of its own. So it's a living, evolving thing. And I hope that you find these little videos that we're doing interesting. Probably going to do a podcast as well later. Similar kind of subject, a little bit more detailed about the Spitfire and the 109 in terms of technical performance maybe, but I'm not sure yet. And there we are. So please, I really hope you've enjoyed it, and it's killed a bit of time for you, if nothing else. Always love the feedback on the comment section, good or bad. And if you enjoy what we're doing and what we're trying to bring to the screen, please subscribe to the channel. It's free, and let's help grow the community. So once again, thanks for listening and letting me talk about my passion for the Battle of Britain and the study of air fighting. And we'll speak again soon.